Well, hey, Callie.
Oh,
How are
hey.
you?
Good. So I was, I'm a nerd, was digging through some things. And did you know that there are less than 2% certified wound care nurses in the nation?
That's that's so crazy to me. It also makes me super, super sad because wound care is so needed in like every department, every specialty. Like we all come across wound care,
Hmm.
and I hate that. I hate that there's not enough of us out there, and or the nurses that want to do it think they can't, think they have to, do med search for forever before they can do it, or they need to have a certification before being hired. And for our company it's not true. Like, we love new grads. We love them coming fresh out of school, knowing what they want, and giving them the education and training. Like, I just wish there was more of that. But I hate that statistic, Callie.
Sorry. First thing,
Yeah.
girl, first thing.
Yeah,
So
I
I know,
know.
let's discuss that more in a different episode because I know we've got a ton to cover today.
We do. But hey guys, welcome to the Unwrapped podcast. I'm Christina.
And I'm Callie.
And what are we talking about today, Callie?
Oh, the drama in the industry, right?
Medicare loves to be that girl. They want to be dramatic. And of course, Callie and I were just joking that, of course, Medicare would drop these changes for all the max right before Thanksgiving. They live for the drama.
Yep. They want everybody to be getting into arguments over the Thanksgiving dinner table about this. So, way to go, Medicare.
They do. They do. Yeah. So, we thought, like, what better first episode than to kind of dive into these changes, you guys, and what does it mean and what does it mean to you? It's a controversial topic, I think. I think some people are excited about this, some are not, and that's fair. But I think the facts are this is happening one way or another, Callie. I think, how long have we been talking about this and the changes that keep happening? I think at the end of the day, it's going to happen,
Hmm.
whether these changes stay effective or they change again. I think it's happening. And so we just really wanted to highlight what these changes are, what it means for you guys as our listeners. And then I think as we continue to monitor, we'll get into more episodes to talk about it more. But yeah, let's kind of review what's going on.
All
And
right.
we're gonna, if you're watching this, we're reading from our guide that we're building for you. And so if you see us looking off, that's what we're doing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Because again, we touched on it in the pilot episode. We are not the type to memorize a script. So,
no,
um,
no, we're just kind of talking about what it means and the
yeah.
feelings that we all have towards it, I think. Yeah.
So if you're just popping in and things like that, or you're like, wait, what change are they even talking about? We are talking about skin substitutes, in the LCD that just came out. But we've been
Yes.
talking about this since May. I remember you and I were at SAWC in the spring, and we were literally going through the proposed
Yep.
guidebook that we put out. And, now it's here. And again, like Christina said, will it actually be effective come February 12th of next year, or is it going to get pushed out? But what we do know is changes are coming. And there are little things that we can start doing today to make sure no matter what the changes come next year, we're all ready and there won't be any delay in patient care. So, with that, let's just dive into it and start unwrapping this
Yeah.
LCD. Um, so, as Christina, our resident clinician and expert, I'm going to be asking her questions on what this actually means because for me, I read these things and I'm like, okay, I think I understand, but because I'm not in the clinic, I really don't have a true understanding of what it really means to the people in the clinic using these products. So, with that, let's just dive into the change in application frequency. So when I was reading through this, I took away that, okay, currently Medicare allows up to 4 applications of a skin substitute per treatment episode. And now they're increasing it to 8 applications, but it must be within a single 16-week episode of care and use the KX modifier after the 4th application. Christina, what does it mean with the increase? What does the KX modifier mean? Like, what does this actually mean to the clinician and the physician, in the clinic?
Yeah, I think this change is great. I think we were all worried for applications like that, how would we even be able to see if the product was working? So I really like that it's increased to 8 applications within the 6 week period, which basically means you could put a skin sub every other week as you monitor. I think that's really cool because we know as clinicians, you don't see any signs of healing for at least 2 to 4 weeks. This is why I always teach our clinicians and our docs, don't keep changing product like week after week. That doesn't work. We need to keep using something for several weeks to see if it's going to change. At 4 weeks, you see nothing's happening, cool, make the change, but you got to give that product some time. So I think this does allow us to see if this product is working. I think the big takeaway is, though, and important to understand is, even if you're going to do 8 at the 4th application, you have to use the KX modifier. So if your facility if you're doing the modifier, or if you have a biller doing the modifier, I think it's really important to have a meeting so that everybody understands, or have a system to track if your EMR tracks it, or if you're doing like a manual tracking, whatever it is, somebody notes at the 4th application, okay, we got to put on this KX modifier. And so I think that change is big, and understanding like a more workflow process of how to keep track of that. So, the main takeaway, increases from 4 to 8 must be within a single 16-week episode of care, and to use the KX modifier after the 4th application. So I think, yeah, like I said, making sure you have your workflow set up, you're having those discussions with all the team members involved, so you guys are all on the same page.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And really, like, making sure documentation is correct, right? Like, that there is some type of review process. And, like, I love that you said all team members, because it really shouldn't just be the physician to
Mm-mm.
understand these. It's every single person, in the clinic that needs to know, what is the protocol, which kind of leads us into the next big change, which
Mm-hmm.
is a protocol in standard of care. Like, we all know what standard of care means. Like, even I, not in the clinic, understand standard of care. But this next big change that they put into this LCD is that before, the current one was like, hey, you need to follow the standard of care protocols before considering skin substitute application. But they didn't actually list out what, that actually means. Like, what protocols are we supposed to be following? Like, my standard of care, their standard of care, what does that actually mean? And so now the big takeaway is that this LCD, explicitly defines what the standard of care expectations are, and how it will, say if the application is approved or not approved. What are your feelings on that, Christina? Because, like I said, standard of care, it's so objective, I feel like.
It totally is. And I think all these years of us helping physicians and clinicians like understand what these LCDs mean in general, way before the skin sub one came out and everything. It was, I think, my frustration with the LCDs was always it was never defined, right? Like, it was like proper use of offloading, proper use of sugar control. But what does that mean? Because how I interpret it means something, how that doctor. And so when we were training our doctors, it did come sometimes with frustration, because the doctor's like, but I did hit on it. But I'm like, well, you didn't hit on it enough, or whatever it is, right? And so I think it's really cool and important that they listed it out,
Mhm.
because I think that's super helpful. And something to understand, in that it distinguishes for DFUs and for VLUs. And so I think Medicare is really seeing that these skin subs are going to be mostly used on diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. And so the new rule really outlines it. So for DFUs, must document a minimum of 50% reduction in wound over a 4 week standard of care period. So that's very clear, right? Like, there's no gray area. You have to document a minimum of half of the wound reduction in size over the last 4 weeks. Evidence of offloading devices. And so, prior it just said offloading. And I think a lot of my docs would be confused, because they're like, well, he is offloading. I told him to. Well, it's like, no, you actually have to outline what devices they're using, and not just devices. Are they compliant? It's super easy for me to say, yep, they're using their crutches. But I think what Medicare wants to see is, okay, you ordered crutches. Are they using it? Are they compliant? Is it working? Is it showing effectiveness? Because I think that's key. At the end of the day, why would we want to put something on a patient that they're walking off anyway? They're putting pressure on. So this makes sense to me as a clinician. It's outlining that the patient's going to behave. and we know the proper things that we have to document to prove that it's working. Same with VLUs, right? Like compression therapy. Prior, it was very vague, a vascular evaluation. Well, again, what does that mean? Is it just feeling pulses? Is it actually getting testing? And so I think actually showing and describing what we need to do is crucial and helps clinicians that are confused. So main takeaways from this is the standard of care protocols. Going back to what we talked about, all team members in your meeting talk about what this is. What's helpful for our centers that we've used is checklists. Now that we know what they're looking for, have a checklist, and your team can constantly revert back to it to know, like, okay, we need to make sure we're hitting this. Did we document this? Just so we're all on the same page and there's a consistency in the documentation. But yeah, like I said, I like it because standard of care means something to somebody, and it just, yeah, I think this is helpful.
No, yeah, I love how you explain that because I literally went back to, oh gosh, forever ago when I was taking my driver's test. I literally failed my first test because I did not look over my shoulder far enough, right? I just was like, that's
You
right.
did a glance. You
Yeah,
didn't
and
look
so
over.
to me, like, I'm like, well, what does that actually mean? Look over my shoulder, right? I thought I did, and I know that's a silly analogy for this, but that's how it made me like think of as like, oh, okay, this actually like lists out what are they looking for? What do they need to be documenting? Right, for a standard of care. So I'm with you. I think at least from an education standpoint, it'll make, like training the teams, creating those checklists makes it so much easier because now it's the same across the board, right?
Yeah.
Standardization, standard of care. So, okay, this next one, it's like a no-brainer to me. But again, I'm gonna say this 1,000 times. I'm not in the clinic. So like it just maybe I'm missing something, but excessive wastage. So like before they were like, just try to eliminate excessive wastage of the product, and now it's like, no, no, no. If you have excessive wastage, your claim will be denied. So like walk me through that, Christina, because maybe I'm just like missing something, but what is wastage? And like to me it's like shouldn't we always be doing the most limited minimum wastage necessary? I don't know. So
Yeah, I think, I think it stems from in the beginning when there was like two skin subs. I remember back in the day, it was just Apigraph and Dermagraph. And it was one size, like that was it, right? And you used it for that wound. And now we have so many options. I think this, just like you said, I think it makes sense. You don't want to use, if your wound's a 2x2 and you're using a 16x16, like that doesn't make sense. And so I think Medicare wanted to crack down, just to make sure like whatever square centimeters your wound is the product you should be. And it should be super simple to get because these product lines now have a size for everything. I feel like one company has like 10 different sizes. So you have the option to choose. Now don't get me wrong. I totally get it's um sometimes can be exhausting to like figure out what size, right? And it changes, especially if you're doing consignment. Some centers like consignment, but the problem is you're going to have consignment for every size. Or if you're not doing consignment, you're ordering it. So I get where people are frustrated because now it's like, well, I have to carry 10 versus just one size. But it makes sense to me. Like the wound is this size, you should be using a product that is the closest to it. Very similar to the LCD of dressings. If your wound is a 2x2, you can't get a 12x12 dressing, right? You have to get as close to the wound. And so I think it's just trying to crack down on the costliness of using the most inappropriate size. So again, workflows, making sure you have a process. If you are doing consignment, look at that. Look at all the sizes you have, because this is going to be a big change, I think, for a lot of centers who haven't been doing it prior. But hey, the main takeaway is, regardless if you follow this or not, like you have to document and make sure you're not going over because you will be denied, and that's kind of the end of it. Like they've made it very white and black. It's you're going to get denied if you're not matching the wastage. So I would be careful. I would make sure you're doing as best as possible. I don't think they're gonna, I could be wrong, but I don't think they're gonna like get so nitpicky, right? Like where it's like, well, you are off 1 centimeter. I think if you're getting as close as possible, cool. But if you're off by like 10 centimeters, like, yeah, that's a little bit ridiculous. So just making sure, again, you're reviewing your product line and what you're using and what you have on hand.
I was gonna say, and with that, like that makes total sense. Like you just can't go to the shelf and grab whatever one you see first, right? And put it on. Like you actually want to be choosing with intention. So like I guess for centers that are like, well, we see an array of wound sizes, right? Or whatever. Could they just like look back at trending on like, okay, the typical average size of a DFU, average size of a VLU, like what are they seeing the most that's come in? And then kind of order based off of those trends. Like I totally get there's going to be the outliers. There's going to be the ones that are huge and the ones that are super small. But to me, like there should be some type of like, this is like the average size. Like, right, a wound can only get so big on the foot, right? It can go deep, but surface area, right? Only so big on a foot. So am I completely wrong in thinking that? Or, what
Well,
would
I
you say?
mean, wounds are so unpredictable. I think that's why it's my favorite thing. So, yeah, a wound on the foot could be ginormous. It could be super small. But I think again, what we're thinking of is where's that sweet spot of when we're
Mhm.
going to use a skin sub. We're not going to use it on something that's ginormous and deep and infected. Of
Yeah.
course not. We're going to use it when it's ready, when it's already healing. We want to give it that kind of boost. And so I think realistically, yes, we could look at the data and say, well, we know these three sizes are our most common. But I think where it's important is, and what we've done is build a great relationship with our rep in
Mhm.
like, hey, these are the ones, well, if you're going to do consignment, these are the ones we're going to have. But also calling your rep and saying, hey, we have this next week. And we're going to need this size. I think understanding that, and it's a conversation with your docs, you don't have to put it on that day. Like you can say, hey, I want to put the skin sub on, maybe in a week or two, like thinking
Mhm.
ahead, and then your clinician can start preparing for that. I think where we get tied up is the docs want to use it that day. And of
Yeah.
course, you're like, well, I don't have that size. And then they get upset because you don't have that size. And it's like, let's put out a protocol now that you let me know when you want to use it. Give me a couple weeks. Let me coordinate. Let me talk with the rep. Let me get what we need. And I think with these rules now, it is going to be a plan ahead. It's not going to be a today I want it on. It's like I want to use it in the next couple weeks. Okay, great. As a clinical coordinator or as a clinician, I can now prepare
Mhm.
documentation. I can make sure we're hitting all of the workflows that we did, making sure the patient's in the right criteria and getting the right size. And I think I don't know if this was intentional, but I think this is kind of what it's come down to is now it's making us slow down a little bit
Mhm.
and think about what we're using versus kind of like before. It's kind of like giving candy to a baby, right? There's all this candy on the shelf and you're just grabbing.
Yeah.
I think this is just making us a little bit more intentional and a little bit more of slowing down and thinking about what we're going to use, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I loved how you put that, like slowing down and like, okay, I think this wound, will benefit from a skin substitute, but it doesn't need to be today that we put it on
Hmm.
at this, care appointment. So I think, yeah, and that also gives like the teams a chance to go back, review the protocols. All right, guys, this patient's getting a skin sub in 2 weeks. Remember, like these are the new protocols for using a skin substitute, right? And it just kind of also just gives one more chance of training and education until it becomes second nature, right? Like,
Hmm.
and then also to me, like again, patient advocate over here, it gives, the team enough time to talk to the patient as well. Like, hey, next time you come in, we're going to use this treatment. This is what this means, and even providing them with that patient education of what is a skin sub. Because honestly, when I first came into wound care, what skin sub, CTP, camp, there's so many different names that people call these things that
Yeah.
like,
And it's a lot
it's
of information for a
yeah.
patient. So giving them the brochure, talking them through it. Maybe they need to talk to their daughter or whoever it is that's within their treatment plan,
Mhm.
to have the discussions and ask the questions. I just think overall it just makes all of us slow down and give that patient a little bit time to grasp, especially someone who's newer to
Yeah.
having a wound and isn't familiar with all of these things that we do. I just think it gives, just like you said, it's very patient forward, lets them think about the options and what we're going to
Mhm.
do, and maybe explaining why this product over it. I can't tell you how many times I had a patient come in and be like, my neighbor used so and so and I want to use it, or I know someone who used this product. How come you don't carry it and why do you
Yeah.
carry this? Because again, there are so many options for skin subs
Mhm.
out there, and so it just kind of allows us to explain it to the patient, maybe look into what they're wanting us to try as
Mhm.
well, and again, just overall just having a conversation with the patient, with the team members, and getting a full understanding.
Yeah, and I think that really transitions us to like the one of the biggest things about this LCD is product selection, right? I mean,
Yes.
you like you said, there are
So many.
so many products out there, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right. And I feel like this LCD in particular is trying to, I don't want to say the word weed out because it's, you know, products are all good in their own way, but there are definitely ones that have like done the time, done the research, right? You know, tried and true, cause so to speak. And so gosh, back in what, April when the proposal came out, there was, you know, 10 products on the proposed list out of the 100 plus products out there on the market. And that was, I think, the big wake up call to everybody like, oh, wait, hold on. I'm only going to be allowed to use these 10 products for DFUs or VLUs. Like, what does this even mean? And so I was happy to see that they kind of, you know, they added a few more to this actual, you know, ruling. But I'm still confused, Christina, because when I was reading through it, it's like, you know, these ones are low risk of bias, high risk of bias, still some concerns, right? And to me, as like the everyday person, when I read still have concerns or high risk for bias, things like that, it literally reminds me of like a parent telling a child, yeah, you can do that, but in all reality, the parent doesn't want you to do that, right? Like, so it's
Yeah.
kind of like, what does this even mean? You know, how can a physician like choose what does this actually mean to them when it says verbiage like high risk, concerns, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you made such a great point. We went from, like you said, I think it was 10, now there's 23. And
Mhm.
now they've actually outlined it what's cleared for DFUs and what's cleared for VLUs. I think, again, Medicare trying to clear that gray area, right? So you know what you have to choose
Mhm.
from. I will be the first to say I am not a researcher. It takes me a while when I'm reading these studies to understand, and I think that's true for a lot of clinicians. If you're not in the research world, or if you're that's just not something you're passionate about, this stuff gets confusing. And so I'm not gonna definitely I'm not gonna try and explain it to you guys what these low risk, high risk means. But what's really nice about the LCD is if you go to the bottom, find your Mac, go to the bottom, it actually outlines each product that's been cleared, and whoever they had review it as a researcher describe why they feel it's high or low risk. Now, these I'm assuming are experts that are reading it, so they're kind of breaking it down. And I honestly think you as a clinician, either the nurse or the doctor, you have to read it. And you're going to
Mhm.
have to kind of come to that realization of what does it mean to you? And is this, if it is high risk, labeled high risk, is it enough of a high risk for you not to use this product? But I think it's a great segue that you and I have been kind of talking about, Callie, is having an episode bringing in a research expert and talking about how to read research. As the everyday clinician, the truth of the matter is research is out there when we all have to read it, right? Even
Mhm.
if it's on a skin sub or product, we're always like, let's see the research. And so we have a whole department and research experts to read these, but for the everyday person in the clinic, they may not. And so I think it'd be really cool to have someone on our podcast to really explain maybe like the simplicity of like, okay, this is what you need to know, and this is what you need to understand about the research. So I'm sure you guys are like, you didn't even tell us anything, but truly, you're gonna have to read it yourself.
Mhm.
It's not the most exciting stuff, but read through it. I think Medicare did the best they could with breaking it down, but trying to understand, what the reasoning is about their concerns about the data or why it's a high risk or a risk of bias, and come to that determination on your own. And WCA, we're gonna help you guys as much as we can with giving you kind of the resources of how to break down the research and how to
Mhm.
understand it. So I wish I could tell you more, Callie, but I'm still reading through it and kind of
No,
understanding, why each of these products have different outcomes.
yeah, and I think right one reading the LCD yourself as well. Like we do have a guide that we're going to put out for free to break this down for every role within the clinic to really understand kind of like what we talked about today. But I also think earlier in the episode you talked about just call your rep, right? Like if you see like, oh, this has high risk in research, things like that, call that company and ask for that research. They'll be more than happy to provide you with that research, the case studies, the posters they've
Oh, yeah.
done. And then you can make an informed decision yourself as well, right? Like, especially docs out there that love to read research, like, just get it straight from the source and then make the decision yourself as well. Like, do you actually find this, you know, as high risk or, you know, is like, the progress and the wounds that they're stating actually there, things like that. So I think, like you said, Medicare they did their best outlining it in a very simple way with the tables that they did. But yeah, I just think some of that language too really puts it back on the provider and the clinicians right in the clinic of like, what does this actually mean to me and my patients? So
Yeah, and I think one thing I've really valued is talk to your doctors, especially I'm focusing on the nurses right now. You may read this and be like, I don't understand, but talk to your doctor because our docs are word nerds. They love to read this. I
mhm,
had one of our docs, he'll circle. He like reads the research, circles it, and then like comes back to me and
yeah,
tells me what it means. And I'm like, thank you. And so talk with your doctor. He may just love research and wants to read it and tells you like why he prefers this product over the other. And I want to preface like what you said, Callie. All of these products are great. I think they're great in their own way. Some are very similar, some are very different. But I
mhm,
think they all are good products. And you just gonna have to make that determination of why you want to use one over the other.
yeah,
And unfortunately, there's a lot of options, but Medicare tried to hone it in for you. But for those who are still confused about approved, non approved, I think that's important. Medicare chose, who knows why, but why they chose these 23 are your approved products, meaning if you follow all of the guidelines within the LCD, you'll be reimbursed if done properly for these products. Unfortunately, all of the other products under the not approved means that right now, if you were to use them, they wouldn't be reimbursed.
mhm,
And for whatever reason, why they're unapproved. I think a lot of it is maybe no literature or not enough literature, or maybe there was a fault in the literature, whatever it is. So I think our biggest tip from this is we listed it out. If you are to see our guide down the road, we listed out approved and unapproved. And I would just look at your inventory right now, and again, this may not be final, but at the very least, you're looking at what products you may have. And if you're using a product on the not approved, I would start thinking about how to make those changes if you wanted to get approved products in your clinic. And so, yeah, just looking at it. And if you have a bunch of product that's not approved, yeah, you're going to want to start kind of figuring out what you're going to do next. But this gives you a good opportunity to prepare. And I think
mhm.
that's all we can do right now until February, if this goes through, is prepare.
Yeah, right. Write the protocols, get the team trained. What will this look like? Because as Christina said earlier, if it doesn't go through, a variation will go through. And so I think being prepared is the best, avenue to be ready for any type of ruling that actually comes out, whether it is in February or it gets pushed out again.
Mhm.
It's coming. And
It's
so, I mean,
coming.
it's coming just like the new hottest therapy, right? Like,
Yep.
it was skin subs and now there's new therapies. And I'm really excited to talk about, PRP. What does that
Mhm.
mean? Because, Christina, when we were talking a couple days ago, you're like, it's crazy because we just met with another product company last Friday. It's like year and a half ago is one, right?
Yeah.
Just,
And
and
now
then it
there's
was
4,
two,
I think.
and
There may
it's
be
three.
more that we haven't
Yeah.
met with, but I mean, I was telling you kind of similar. Do you know how long I've been in the industry? When we started, there was 2, and then now there is however hundreds of them. I see the same pattern with PRP.
Yeah.
Obviously this therapy is seeing an opportunity. It's a business, right? They see an opportunity and they're jumping on it. And we met with 1, and then there was 2, and now there's 4. At least at the
Mhm.
last conference, we met with this new company, and so it's just going to keep growing. There's just going to be more
Yeah.
companies. And so I think now's the time also, as we're preparing for skin sub changes, of educating ourselves and getting us prepared of what is PRP. Because I think there's
Mhm.
still a lot of misconception. I think there's still a lot of like, how do we bring this into our center?
Mhm.
Because we went through that, right? Like we were like, we're gonna have to change processes, build a protocol. What is our policy on this? It definitely does change workflow to use PRP, but in a good way. I think so far we're seeing great healing with it. But yeah, I'm excited to have an episode talking about that. What does it mean? What are the
Mhm.
changes and how to incorporate it in your facility?
Yeah, and how each product differs, right, from each other
Hmm.
because all 4 of them are so different, you know? And that's like, okay, like how does each one fit into the clinic flow? What does
Hmm.
it mean? Things like that. So very excited for that. But kind of wrapping up this LCD changes, like if you guys have any questions or concerns, shoot them over to us. We'll take time at the beginning of the next episode to kind of answer them. We do have that super user-friendly guidebook coming out as well to kind of go over it, and again, that's free. We're not trying to make money off of this. We're really just trying to get the awareness out and, the education out of what this actually means to everybody.
Yeah, and if you're coming to the end of this podcast and you're like, "They told me nothing. They just read the LCD. That was purposeful."
Yeah.
We're just scratching the surface. Like, again, this may change. They may make new changes. It may not even come out in February. But what we do know is it affects all Macs. Right now it's February 15th, 2025 that it's coming out. And our biggest advice is to be prepared. As things continue to change and as we kind of develop more insight, we will continue to let you guys know we were just scratching the surface and wanted to just highlight the biggest changes for you guys so that we can help you understand it if you were confused so far. But yeah, more to come, you guys. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Unwrapped podcast. We hope that you found the information and insights provided to be helpful in your wound care journey. If you have any questions you'd like to be answered on the podcast, we invite you to connect with us on Instagram or LinkedIn and place your question under the Unwrapped podcast post. We look forward to bringing you more wound care insights. Thank you for listening.